Okay, I'm going to read to you from the page proofs of a new book, which very unusually for me is nonfiction. I kind of surprised myself by doing this. So it's going to come out in India in November, and it's going to be called over there Mirrored Mind. And then shortly thereafter it'll come out in England, and they're going to call it Deep Sublime. Next year, Railroad will publish it in the US, and they haven't decided on a title yet. So the reason I think that this is happening, and we can figure out what to call the damn thing, is because it's about a lot of stuff. There's a memoirish strand that runs through it about me writing my first novel. It's also about the culture of computer programming and programmers. It's about the aesthetics of code. And it's about a big section, or another strand running through it, about medieval Indian literary theory from the 10th and 11th centuries. And you're just going to have to trust me on this, there is a connection. So I'm going to read to you from the memoir part. As I start, I've just gotten a BA in English. I successfully avoided the question of how I was going to make a living until the summer after I finished my undergraduate degree. When I was forced to come up with an answer, it was film school. If I couldn't sell screenplays, at least there was a thriving Indian film industry I could get a job in. I applied to the film department at Columbia University and showed up a few months later on the 5th floor of Dodge Hall, driven not so much by clarity about what cinema could offer me, but by a profound uneasiness about what was on offer just a floor below in the writing program, a commitment to a life as a writer of fiction. It wasn't just the paucity of money in the profession. I knew most writers had day jobs, but writing was difficult, grueling in a different way from making movies, from having to deal with dozens of egos and schedules and weather fluctuations to get a single shot. Making fiction with resonance, with that endless echoing depth of feeling I had found in Hemingway was very, very hard. Writing sentences felt like construction and also simultaneously a steady, slow excavation. You put each word in place, brick upon brick, with a shimmering sense of what the whole edifice would look like, the shape of the final thing. But each phrase was also a digging inward and uncovering. You tuggled, dug. On good days, you emerged from your labors tired but happy. On bad days, you were left quivering, stupefied. There was risk and danger involved in this work. You always got strung out, ground down, strained thin. Ended up a little sad, maybe a little mad. Not a way to spend a life. So there I was in 1986 at film school with the first semester's tuition paid for and $200 in my bank account. So I'm going to skip ahead a little. I ran off to the Columbia Job Board, and I find a job doing transcription for a company in the medical insurance industry. 3 months after I began working, the company acquired its first PCs for us to work on. I had typed my papers and stories on a terminal attached to a huge mainframe computer at college, and had taken a couple of programming classes, which I thought were tepidly interesting. I was good at writing bubble sorts for lists of words, but it all seemed quite abstract, of no immediate practical purpose. The mainframe was controlled by a specialized cadre of tech heads, and my access to it was distanced and narrowed. Now, though, at my scrivener job, I had a computer I could play with. I blazed through my assigned work, no more worrying about typos and omissions, propped up stacks of paper to signal that I was busy, and dove into the arcane depths of DOS. Here was a complete world, systems and rules I could discover and control. I could write little batch files to run commands to change directories and copy files. And the software we used to write the reports worked perfect. I could control that too, write clever macros to put in the date, to recognize my abbreviations for the medical jargon, to pop in whole paragraphs of text. And now any repetition of effort seemed like an insult. Spend half an hour writing a report that didn't quite fit the standard format? No way, screw that. I'd rather spend 6 hours tinkering with if-then-else routines in my report macros so it would support the specialized format too. Soon I was the de facto tech support guy for our little office and was advising on future purchases of hardware and software. I bought computer magazines on the way home and lusted after the monster PCs and the double-page photo spreads. More speed, bigger memory, huge hard disks. I wanted all these, but even on the decidedly low-end machines I had access to, there was an entire universe to explore. There were mysteries, things I didn't understand, but there were always answers. If I tried hard, there was always a logic to discover, an internal order and consistency that was beautiful. And I could produce these harmonies, test them, see them work. When a program broke, when it did something unexpected, I could step through the code, watch the variables change, discover where I had made unwarranted assumptions, where the user had done something I didn't expect. And then I could change, adapt, and run the code again. And when I fixed the code, when it ran, the victory coursed through my brain and body. I wanted to do it again. I left New York with a taste for this wizardry and an idea for a novel. I'd figured out in fairly short order that the collaborative, cash-intensive business of filmmaking was not a good fit for me. Being around people all day tired me out. Not writing fiction made me ferociously cranky, and the ideas I had for screenplays required gargantuan budgets. The novel I wanted to write moved back and forth between the 19th and 20th centuries, featured cavalry battles, a typing monkey, a character dismembering himself, and many other special effects that I could pull off myself without a crew or funding. So I finally accepted my fate. A lifetime of fiction-making anxiety and possible poverty was what I was built for, and running around on a film set wouldn't rescue me from writer's demons. There was a fortifying relief in knowing this, and I went off to a couple of graduate writing programs to get on with the work. I did a year at the writing seminars at Johns Hopkins and then moved on to the University of Houston. I wrote my novel and lived the life of the itinerant graduate teaching assistant, which meant many wonderfully tipsy, passionate, highbrow conversations in low-end bars during post-paycheck fortnights, and a steady decline in the quality and quantity of food thereafter. I was with my tribe, happy, writing steadily and hard, but clearly my revenue streams needed some new tributaries. Most of my fellow TAs had second teaching jobs, but these were poorly paid, and bi-weekly confrontations with towering stacks of freshman comm papers had engendered in me a bitter hatred for all students. I looked around for other writing work and requested information from publishers of porn and romance novels. I was quite willing to do this easy, honest labor, but found that literary novel writing apparently exhausted my creative resources, which ran to about 400 words a day and were subsequently incapable of delivering even formulaically heaving bosoms and thrusting rods. I was saved by a fellow graduate student who had noticed my burgeoning geekiness. By now, I was walking around campus with 800-page computer manuals tucked under my arm and holding forth about the video game virtues of Leisure Suit Larry in the grad student lounge. My friend asked me to help set up her new computer, and I arrived at her house with a painstakingly curated collection of bootleg programs and freeware utilities and an extra large bottle of Diet Coke. She just wanted to be able to write short stories and print them out, but one of the preeminent signs of computer mania is a fanatical exactitude, a desire to have the system work just so. I tricked out her machine, emptied my bottle of soda, and then gave her my standard lecture about on-site and off-site backup and the importance of regular hard disk checks and defragging. She looked a bit overwhelmed, but a couple of weeks later she called me to ask if I would help a friend of hers, the owner of a local bookstore, with his new computers at his shop. They'll pay you, she said. Pay me? For letting me play with their new machines? No doubt still boxed and unsullied and ripe for my superior setup skills? This seemed incredible, but I gathered myself and said, sure, sounds good. This was the beginning of a busy and profitable career as an independent computer consultant, which in short order led to paid programming gigs. As many consultants and programmers do, I learned on the job. If I didn't know how to do something, Usenet and the technical sections of bookstores pointed me in the general direction of a solution. I was fairly scrupulous about not billing clients for the hours spent educating myself, more from a desire not to overprice my services than moral rectitude. I did provide value. Word of mouth gave me a growing list of clients, and I was able to raise my hourly rate steadily. I set up computers for elegant ladies in River Oaks and gave them word processing lessons. I went out to factories and offices in the hinterlands of Houston to observe assembly lines and then model workflows and production processes. The programming I did was journeyman work. I mostly wrote CRUD applications, menu-driven screens that let the users create, retrieve, update, and delete records that track whatever product or service they provided. Precision-engineered drill parts for high-heat applications, workers for the oil industry, reservations at restaurants. Simple stuff, but useful, and I always felt like I was learning and making good money, sometimes even great money. I could afford biannual trips to India. Programming in America paid for my research and writing. I managed to get through grad school without taking any loans, finished my novel, and found an agent. After the novel was published, I accepted a university teaching job in creative writing and finally gave up the professional freelance computer work. That served me well. Now it was time to write. I found soon enough that although I may have stopped chasing the fat consulting paychecks, the impulse to program had not left me. The work of making software gave me a little jolt of joy each time a piece of code worked. When something wasn't working, when the problem resisted and made me rotate the contours of the conundrum in my mind, the world fell away, my body vanished, time receded. And 3 or 4 hours later, when the pieces of the problem came together just so and clicked into a solution, I surfed a swelling wave of endorphins. On the programming section of Reddit, a popular social news site, a beginner posted a picture of his first working program with the caption, "For most of you, this is surely child's play, but holy shit, this must be what it feels like to do heroin for the first time." Even after you are long past your first hello world, there is an infinity of things to learn. You're still a child, and if you aren't burnt out by software delivery deadlines and management-mandated all-nighters, coding is still play. You can slam this pleasure spike into your veins again and again, and you want more and more and more. It's mostly a benign addiction, except for the increased risks of weight gain, carpal tunnel syndrome, bad posture, and reckless spending on programming tools you don't really need but absolutely must have. So I indulged myself and puttered around and made little utilities and grading systems and such like. I was writing fiction steadily, but I found that the stark determinisms of code were a welcome relief from the ambiguities of literary narrative. By the end of a morning of writing, I was eager for the pleasures of programming. Maybe because I no longer had to deliver finished applications and had time to reflect, I realized that I had no idea what my code actually did. That is, I worked within a certain language and a formal system of rules. I knew how the syntax of this language could be arranged to affect changes in a series of metaphors, the file system, the desktop, Windows. But the best understanding I had of what existed under these conceptualizations was a steampunkish series of gear wheels taken from illustrations of Charles Babbage's Different Engine. So now I made an attempt to get closer to the metal, to follow the effects of my code down into the machine. I'll stop there.